everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today for this live stream event. My name is Rebecca, and I'm the event planner of the Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, I'd like to quickly review two items, our code of conduct and our event guidelines. So code of conduct, Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. We encourage engagement. We just ask that you be mindful with your commentary in the chat. This session is being recorded. You won't appear in the recording. And at probably about 24 to 48 hours from now, it'll be uploaded to our on-demand on YouTube. If you have questions, please submit them into the chat. If you're not signed in, you'll need to do so to have access to interact there. Whether you're joining us from Learn TV or YouTube, you need to have an account there. For closed captioning is available. You can either, for YouTube, it's a CC at the bottom. If it's Learn TV, you just click on the little icon that looks like a chat bubble at the bottom as well, and you can turn those on. So if you need any of that, it's available. Which brings us to today's session. We are joined by Gwyneth Peña-Siguenza, a cloud advocate here at Microsoft, for her session, Getting Started with Developing Web Apps with Blazor. The session will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for questions throughout. If you have not done so already, please check into this session. I'll drop the links to that in the chat as well. You'll receive your session resources there. Which includes the Learn module that Gwyn will be reviewing and her deck. So at this time, I will step away and let Gwyn take over from here.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for that lovely introduction. Hi, everyone. I already see some comments in the chat. That's great. It looks like people were here before we actually started, so that makes me feel a little bit special. So, yeah, we're going to be doing some slides. I know slides are boring, but there's some information I want to share with y'all. So it'll take a few minutes. We'll go through that, and then we'll dive right into a demo and learn some Blazor, which I am a big fan of. If you have seen me tweet and make YouTube videos about it. All right, so we're going to be taking a look at what is Blazor, hosting models, components, and logic, pros and cons, resources, the demo, and then ideally we have a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. You don't have to necessarily worry about taking notes or anything like that because this slide deck is available for you to download. We'll make sure to pop that link into the chat. But yeah, let's dive right into the first actual part of this, which is what is Blazor. So Blazor is, I've tried to highlight probably the most important part of each slide. So if you see highlights, that's why it is. So my sort of one-line description or definition, if someone asks me what is Blazor, it's an open source framework for building web applications with C#, HTML, and CSS. And so the C#, HTML, and CSS build what are called components. And components are meant to sort of create your UI. So you build your UI utilizing these components. The great part about Blazor is you get to share your C# code and your libraries with the front end and the back end because you're utilizing C# and .NET for both of those. So there's also the option to still utilize JavaScript, but it's not as much as you would with other web frameworks that use JavaScript, right? We have two hosting models when it comes to Blazor. We have Webassembly, and then we have Blazor Server. With Webassembly, the apps will run completely in the browser, so in the client-side browser. And then with Blazor Server, the apps are executed on a server, so nothing gets downloaded to the client. Everything gets executed server-side within an ASP.NET Core app. To get started developing Blazor apps, you'll need Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio for Mac, depending on which OS you're working on, and the .NET 5 SDK. Let's talk a little bit about the hosting models. Like I mentioned, we have Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server. So Blazor WebAssembly is enabled by something called Webassembly, or WASM, or WASM, which is this, it's kind of weird, but WASM for short. It's a low-level assembly-like language with a compact binary format. And this is what allows it to be pretty fast, near native speed. And it is designed to work alongside JavaScript. And this is what Blazor WebAssembly is built up on, right? So Blazor WebAssembly uses WebAssembly to sort of compile your .NET runtime to WebAssembly. So all your .NET code gets compiled to that, and that is what runs on the browser. But I guess I wouldn't say downside necessarily, but this is getting better as time goes and as the technology improves and matures. But WebAssembly does require a modern desktop or mobile browser. Microsoft Edge, Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, and Apple Safari are currently supported, which are probably the most popular browsers anyway. But we'll talk a little bit more about this in the pros and cons. And if we take a look on the left side here, we have sort of like a screenshot or a diagram of how the Blazor WebAssembly runs. So we have our Razer Components, which we'll dive a little deeper into those in upcoming slide. Then we have our .NET, and we can see that gets compiled to WebAssembly. And then we see that the interaction with the DOM, which is the functionality that the browser has, is all done there. Like there's no back and forth with the server. There's actual no server that you're working with either. So everything is just right in your browser. So yeah, your apps run client side in the browser on a WebAssembly-based .NET runtime. And so the app, its dependencies, and the actual .NET runtime are downloaded to the browser when you go to the URL of your app. And you can access all the DOM functionality with using the JavaScript interrupt. And I've added sort of links here that you can sort of poke around to and learn deeper into these concepts. So make sure to grab those slides. All right, so Blazor server. So as the name sort of gives it, there's a server running your application. So nothing necessarily gets downloaded to the client's browser. It's all running on a server like we can see here on the right side. There's another diagram here. So the server is going to handle executing your C# code, sending UI events from the browser to the server, and applying any UI updates to your Razer components, which are those pieces of UI that you use to build your applications. And we see here we have sort of these arrows that go back and forth with the browser, and then we have that word signal R in the middle. And signal R, if you might be familiar, you might have worked with it in other .NET applications, but it's a library that enables us to implement real-time functionality inside of our applications. And Blazor Server relies on a signal R connection to handle the updates that go back and forth with the browser and the server. Let's talk a little bit about components, because I've been saying the word a lot. But if we take a look at this sort of right-hand side screenshot of this is the template Blazor app that you get when you create a new Blazor application. And when you see we have home, counter, and fetch. And then we have sort of like a navigation bar on the left, and then on the right we have our main content. All of these are actually components, and a component itself, and the component isn't specific to Blazor. It's sort of a lot of these single-page application frameworks utilize components. So it's a self-contained portion of UI, user interface, and it also has some sort of processing logic to it. In Blazor, we use something called Razer Components. You might have used Razer with MVC, Razer Pages, and such. But Razer is like a syntax that utilizes HTML and C#. And we'll take a look at this when we dive into the demo. These Razer components have the extension of .razer. So at each time, at compile time, the .razer file is turned into a .NET class. And components can be nested. Well, the whole, I guess, reasoning around using components is so they're reusable, so you can, use them in a nested way, share them with other projects. Like Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server utilize the same syntax. So if you create something in Blazor WebAssembly or the other one, you can share your components back and forth. Oftentimes, people will start with creating a project in one just as a prototype, and then they realize that the other one is a better fit, and it's pretty easy to sort of make that conversion. And then if you've used MVC, you're familiar with Razer Components, Razer Pages, etc. Let's talk a little bit about adding logic to your apps. There's a lot of highlights in here. But there's sort of two ways to add code to your Blazor applications. You can do something that's called code behind, which you create a separate .cs class for each component. And that would follow a certain format. So you'd have component name .razer.cs, and that way the application knows, like, okay, this is the CS file for this specific component. Or you could do it in the actual .razer file itself, and we have sort of different sort of symbols and such that we need to use to transition from HTML to C# if you're doing anything inside of the actual Razer markup. So right here I have that. You got to use the @ symbol to transition from HTML to CSS. So in this example, I have like @ then I have var Gwyneth, and then we have a paragraph with that same at that referencing that variable name, and then that renders to HTML just as a paragraph with my name in there. If we need to access C# members, so that's properties, methods, and fields, we would actually use a code block. And if we need to bind values or one-way binding or two-way binding, actually, we would do @bind, and then that would enable the actual HTML element to have like a two-way connection with whatever variable we're attaching or property we're attaching to that specific HTML element. This is sort of just like theory. We'll dive into this a little deeper in the demo. Pros and cons. So I'm a big fan of not just sort of painting any sort of technology as the perfect solution, because everything has its pros and cons. So let's talk a little bit about pros and cons of Blazor WebAssembly. Pros: it runs inside the client browser, and this is like sort of like the sell when it comes to these single page applications. So you can deploy it as a static site, and the benefit to this is you can deploy these applications for very, very cheap. Like I have a couple of these running at less than like $1 a month. I can also work offline. Again, this is because there's no like back and forth with the server. Like you don't have to be connected to anything. You can potentially work offline unless there's some sort of API or something that requires online network connection, or you're pulling data from somewhere, then you can't work offline. But the features that don't require that, you can. And again, the server load is significantly reduced because we're not implementing a server here. Now, the cons of client-side Blazor WebAssembly. It does require, so when you load up you go to the URL of your application for the first time, it does require that all the .NET DLLs, the assemblies and such have to be downloaded. So that makes your startup time slower in comparison to server-side Blazor and JavaScript applications. But this does get cached, so every time after that, it's going to be much faster. And this other last con that I've listed here is specific to all SPA frameworks, though other popular ones have sort of features that you can sort of work around, like official features that you can implement to work around this limitation, but it's not search engine friendly. This is mainly because the sort of these crawlers that kind of optimized for SEO and such require pages and data to be rendered. And the rendering of an application only happens when you actually go to the app. So for a single page application, only happens when you visit the app. And this is actually something that doesn't happen with server side because all that's pre-rendered by the server anyway. So that's actually the first pro of Blazor server side, is that it is search engine friendly. Since there's nothing really to download to the client, there's very little startup time, and it works on older browsers, and because there's no requirement for WebAssembly, right? So if you have, if you're building an application that you need it to run on like thin clients are these sort of like minimal computers that don't necessarily have the same operating system of like your typical like computer. Like it's like Windows Home. It's like a minimal version of your operating system. So they won't have like full blown browsers. They'll have like some sort of like stripped down or watered down version. And those don't have support for WebAssembly. But in those cases, you could utilize Blazor Server. The cons, obviously, because there is a server, you're going to have server costs and server maintenance and things like that. And it can't work offline, again, because that SignalR connection is always going to update the browser with the backend. So it requires a network connectivity for it to have that back and forth, right? All right. Resources. Yes, I've included here a bunch of resources where you can learn more, and then a couple more of the tutorials that you can do on the top right there. And then the repo for what we're going to be building in this demo is also down there. And if you have any questions, you can get in touch with me via Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Those are there too. So yeah, grab yourself a copy of these slides, and I think we're ready for demo time. Yes, let me switch to my terminal. I want to make sure this is large enough for everyone to see, but we can switch back to my screen, and then we're going to go sort of dive into building a Blazor. We'll do Blazor WebAssembly. Again, the syntax is pretty similar, but well, that's what we'll do. Again, I added the prerequisites of what you actually need to develop these applications. So It's just some sort of Visual Code, Visual Studio, or Visual Studio for Mac, and then .NET 5. And when .NET 6 comes along, .NET 6. Okay, cool. So I'm in the desktop already, so I could probably just do .NET new, and then we'll have to provide the template that we're using, Blazor WebAssembly. And I'm just going to call this Blazor app because I'm very creative. Fantastic. And then we're going to move into that. And we're going to open that up. And I'll be using Visual Code. But I do want to make sure that we can see it. So I'll probably have to, let me just open up a page here. And then just make sure the font is large enough. That good? I think that's good, right? You want extra? That might be better. I'll probably have to scroll around a lot because I want to sort of have the actual browser that we're running the application. Maybe I'll just move it back and forth or something. So I'm going to actually run this so we can sort of have a side-by-side of the project, the structure of the project and what's in the browser. So if we do .NET watch, run. This should build already our application. Again, it gives us a full working Blazor app. So I have this on the side here. Maybe we can do it a little, something like that. Yeah, cool. So actually, I might be able to do this here. Put that there, and then we'll go one lower here. Okay, cool. So let's first take a look at, this is a fully functioning Blazor WebAssembly application. We have a home component, we have a counter component, and a fetch data component. The cool thing about this template is that sort of like the complexity of the Razer markup and the actual components sort of increases as you go through these. So we'll take a look at this the project structure here on the left side. So we have a pages, which would correspond to what we see on here. And you would also see that if we have in the shared folder, we also have things that end in .razer. So we have .razer, and remember from the slides that .razer means it's a component. The difference between what goes into pages and what goes into shared is at the top of, let's open like this index one, you see we have this at page. Then we have a backslash, and we have nothing here because we're signaling that we want this to be our index or our home, which would match over here. If we go to counter, we'll see we have a counter here, and that would correspond to here. So what's in pages are components that are meant to be accessed via some sort of URL. And what you have in shared is you'll see the difference that there's no at page there, right? So shared are typically components that are meant to be used sort of like internally and not be able to access directly, right? So, keep that in mind. We'll take a look at the index, and we could probably, you know what, let's finish going through the structure of the project. So we have pages, we have the components, shared components that are meant to be used internally, not reached. The WW root, this is actually what gets when you build a release and something that you actually want to deploy, you get the WW root created for you, and that's what gets deployed to wherever you're deploying your WebAssembly project, like static storage or something like that, right? And you have your CSS in here. If you have any images, you would add them in here as well. If your imports, here's where if you're a .NET developer, you might be familiar with utilizing packages. And if we want to make something sort of globally available to reference in different classes or different components and such, we would put it in here. The app.razor is actually the initial component. Maybe I can make this like this, the initial component. And you can see that this starts with a router. So this is what enables routing to all of our other components, meaning the components that have like this at page up here. Next, we have our .cs Proj, which just provides details of which target framework we're targeting, which packages are we referencing. We can see them here, and which SDK we're utilizing. And we have our program.cs, which is our sort of main method that kind of starts everything. And when you want to include a different service, by default, you get an HTTP service that you can utilize, HTTP client. But if you wanted to add, say you're working with a different component library, there's a bunch of popular ones out there for Blazor, like MudBlazor or Blazorized comes to mind, but you would sort of configure them in here so you can utilize them throughout your application as well. I think I covered them all. Yeah, at least the most important ones. So let's sort of dive into each one of these components. Let's take a look at this index one. I'm going to take a quick break to take a look at the chat so I'm not forgetting. Let's see. Is it necessary? Where are we? We got a bunch of links. Oh, I'm just gonna say hi to a couple people. Hey, Rishabh, how's it going? Juan, how's it going? Is it necessary to learn Python operators? I know this is not too specific to Blazor. So if you want me to address this question, I would sort of add that to like hit me up on Twitter or something like that. Let's see, another pro Blazor. Here we go. Another pro for Blazor server is Windows authentication for enterprise solutions. That is correct. There are countless companies out there that utilize Windows authentication. So, you know, having that sort of carry over into your web applications that you can build with Blazor server was, I think, a pretty big pro to me. So thank you for pointing that out. I think I have another one here. It's a very about Blazor WebAssembly. Is it safe to make course calls from a static Blazor app, or should we use ASP.NET Core hosted? I think that depends to what extent you're going to be utilizing that. It is possible to do, and there's ways to configure that. I just did that one. All right, cool. All right, so let's dive right into these components and sort of break them apart and start to like build our own, right? So let's go into our home one, and we're going to open this index.razor on the left side. And we already sort of discussed what the at page does. And then we have just an H1, if you're familiar with HTML, it's like a header one. And we have this just random text. And then we see sort of this weird element that says survey prompt and a title, and it has like a gray background and such. But this is actually a component in itself. If we go to our shared file here on the left, we see we have a survey prompt.razor, and this is what is sort of defining this component that we see in the index file, right? So we have like a gray background, we got a title, and we see this at symbol here. So remember I mentioned that when you want to transition in your Razer components from HTML to C#, you'll have to use that at. We have that here, and then we also have an at code block down here. So in order to access C# members, which we're doing in here, we actually have this parameter attribute for this string title here. We have to use a code block, right? And the cool part about this, so if I go back into the index and I grab, if I just copy this, we'll just do over, it'll just keep adding the component really. And remember that parameter, that parameter attribute that you're utilizing under the title, above the title, that it was the string. We can pass in data. So passing data from one component to another can be used via these parameter attributes. So yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. Like I mentioned, the complexity for each component sort of goes up as we go to the other one. Let's take a look at the counter one. The counter one is you click this thing and it increases by 1. But this sort of shows you the functionality of how, all right, we have this at symbol, and we have a current count, which is what's displaying here. If I were to change this current count to 10, and since I'm running .NET watch run, it's going to update here. It's going to say 10, right? If I wanted to sort of use some sort of expression, I could do like current count plus 1. Oh, it always shows it incremented by 1, right? So it'll fire the correct event. This button here, this is utilizing Bootstrap. So this class here, button primary, as you use it more, you get sort of you kind of start to build like a memory around the names of the components in the classes and such. So yeah, I changed this to danger. But it really depends on what you want it to look like. The interesting part about this specific button is the on click. So we have this at on click, and then this at on click is calling this increment count. And then we have a text click me, and this is also all defined in here. So this is an example of inline code, because this actual code, so the access to the C# members is done within the Razer component itself, within the .razor file, and we don't have a separate .cs file for it. And I could probably do something like private int increment by, and we'll say, I don't know, 5. And then instead of doing plus plus, I'll do plus equal increment by. So that way, instead of adding just 1 to it, I'll add whatever this increment by value is. And then every time I click that, it's incrementing by 5, right? So pretty straightforward here. Now let's take a look at the fetch data, which is actually pulling data from a weather forecast JSON file. That is actually in our www root. If we go to sample data weather.json, we see we have sort of several entries of of weather information. We have date, temperature, Celsius, and summary. So this table here and this component here actually is pulling that data from that JSON file and then making it available for us to work with in the component. So how does it actually do that? The sort of like the, I guess, maybe poster child reason for single page applications is to work with APIs. Like that's kind of where they shine. It's probably pretty straightforward to use them when it comes to utilizing those frameworks. So we see, let's start with the C# code down here. So we have an array here, forecast of type weather forecast. So this means we have some sort of class definition at some point, and we do down here. We have the date. So remember, we saw in the JSON file, we saw date, we saw temperature, Celsius, and then summary, and then the temperature Fahrenheit. We're doing our own calculation here with a, this is an expression bodied member. And then if we go up here, we have this special method here called Initialized Async. So whenever a component is initialized for the first time, like you reload the page or you go to the app for the first time, this method is going to run. And then this one is telling us, all right, so in this forecast array that we have here, we're going to go get the JSON, the JSON from this file that we're providing the directory to. And this is just a local file, but we can work with APIs as well. And we know that it's of this type weather forecast. So go ahead and save this. So we go back up to the HTML. We see that right off the bat, we have like if forecast is null, and it's just going to display us a loading message. So if I comment this out here, and we go back up to here, you know, it's supposed to tell us loading, and that's exactly what it tells us because the call to actually load the data never happens. But I'm gonna actually uncomment that. It's giving us a warning like, hey, this method isn't doing anything. But once the data does load, so we go into this else clause, we see that we have a table component here, and then the head of our columns are date, temperature, Celsius, temperature, Fahrenheit, and summary, which matches the definition of the class that we were using. And then we go here, we see some C# code in the middle. So we transition into C# code and we say for each forecast that's inside of forecasts, grab that, the date of that, we'll grab the temperature, we'll grab the temperature Fahrenheit and the summary and sort of list it. And that's how we get these rows here. I actually have, let me pull this up here. I have an Azure function that is displaying some cryptocurrency data. I know crypto's all the rage these days, so I figured it'd be an appropriate example. So it's just JSON with some, the current price of Bitcoin, the current price of Ethereum and such. So I'm going to sort of mold this component here to pull this data for us. I'm only going to grab, let's grab the symbol and we'll grab the current price. I know these other things matter, but it's just an example. So first thing I have to do is probably create a class here. We'll go down here. And we'll switch this way. And we'll do public class. We'll call it coin. And we'll define by string. And I think the name is, let me see, the symbol. It's called symbol. Symbol. And then we have our getters and setters. And then I'm going to do the same for what's the other one that we want to pull? Let's do current price. And that's public. Double, whoops, I forgot this is got to follow those C# naming conventions. Current price. All right, so this is going to fail because we see in the JSON it's lowercase, that's by convention. So lowercase, and then we have here an underscore, and then here they're not matching, obviously. So what we can use is we can use an attribute here. And we'll say it's called, I think it's JSON property name. Yes, I believe it's name. And in here, we'll just provide the name that it comes in as the JSON. And here, it's just lowercase symbol. And then over here, it is JSON property name. And this one is current underscore price here. All right, so we're getting an error, of course, because we'll go here and this is part of a package that we haven't added to ours, so we can probably just right click here and using system.text.json.serialization. Again, if you're familiar with .NET development, utilizing packages, getting things from like NuGet and such are pretty familiar with you. So we have to use that using directive here to be able to utilize that package, and those errors go away. So we have now the class that we can sort of use to work with objects, and we'll go up here and we'll say private coin, and we'll call it coins. Pretty straightforward. And then here we'll comment this one out, and then we'll go ahead and create one that says coins equals, and we could probably just copy this line here and then just edit that. And then it's not type weather forecast anymore, it's type coin. And then we need to make sure we're grabbing this URL here. So instead of pulling from the local JSON file, that looks good to me. And now we have to go back up to the HTML because remember, this is loading and this sort of set up to load weather forecast. So we'll change this to crypto, I guess. Crypto. This is something like that. And then it's no longer forecast because we're loading it into coins. And we just need 2 columns because we're only pulling 2 of them. The first one is symbol, and then the next one is, see, we're starting to get errors down here. Yep. And then the next one is current price. Price, and then for var, so we're no longer wanting to loop through the forecast one, we want to loop through the coins one. So for each coin inside of coins, we're going to grab coin dot, we'll remove this here, coin dot symbol, and then coin dot, what's the other one? Current price, there we go. All right, and then if we, there we go, it loads onto the side of the table there. We see we have symbol, current price, and this is like a very, very simple way of working with an API. Like you can have this update in real time, which is actually a workshop that we have going on in about 2 weeks. So, we'll be utilizing SignalR to implement real time functionality to web applications. But yeah, you can have things like real-time data. You can have things like, I see this, for example, this market cap change percentage 24 hours, like this could be positive or negative. So you could have like the color of the price be a certain, color depending on if it went up or down or whatever, right? So yeah, it's a single page applications, and Blazor WebAssembly is one of those. Really shine when you're working with APIs. It's pretty easy to get going. All right, so now let's take a look at how we can actually create our own components, right? We're good on time? Yeah, we're good on time. All right, I want to take a look at some questions here in the chat. Let's see. If you had something like CSV Reader, you could presumably load data from CSV2. Yes, that is correct. With Blazor WebAssembly, a lot of these .NET tools are available. .NET tools and libraries and such are available. There's a little bit of a limitation there depending on what you're looking to use. With .NET Server, it's like full compatibility because again, it's a .NET ASP.NET Core app really that's running everything. So yes, let's take a look here. I think I got all of these. Oh, creating a Blazor application. The command is, it's actually .NET new, and then so it's .NET new Blazor WASM, and then you can do -n. So if I sort of I'll type it out. Let me create a new terminal here. If you do .NET new Blazor WebAssembly, so it goes and then -name. So it'll be .NET and then new and then whichever template. If it's server, it's a different one. If it's any kind of different .NET project that you're working with, it's going to be a different one here. And -n is so you can provide the name, and then you provide the name of what application you want to utilize. All right, so let's go about sort of diving into creating our own components. I'm going to go right click here. I'm going to click a new file. I'm going to say to do Razer, right? So keep in mind that the convention here is for your components, the first letter has to be capitalized, and it ends in .razer, right? And then right off the bat, I want it to, I want to be able to access it using like visiting. If I visit to do, I want to be able to get to it. We'll switch back to this one here. Now, I might have to rerun this here. We'll run this again. So it'll pick up the new, sort of put this back on this side. Whoops. There we go. All right, so if I go to /to-do, you see we have nothing there, but if I add, say, a header here, say to-do app, something like that, and it'll render that for us too. But we see it, like, I don't want to have to type in to-do every single time. I want to add it to our navigation on here on the left side. So this allows us to sort of dive into that component, the main layout, and then the nav menu that are inside the shared folder. Let's take a look at the main layout.razor first. So this actually describes the layout that your entire application is going to follow. You see here, it says, all right, so you have a page, which is the whole thing, and then you have a sidebar, and the sidebar, you're going to have a nav menu component, which is, it's defined down here. And then you have a main, which becomes the rest of this body, this sort of white area. And we see we have this about up here, and we could also change that, obviously. We could change that to about Blazor. And then we would see that that change applies to every single, if I go to counter, we'll see it's about Blazor. If I go to fetch data, that doesn't change, right? So this layout is for the entire application. And then we have another div here with the actual body of our component. So our component will be rendered inside of here, right? So remember that we have this nav menu, and that's also a component. I'm going to close a couple of these. That is also a component on the, right here. And we see we have first we have sort of like the name of the application. So I have Blazor app. We could do like demo app, and that's this top area down here. And then depending on like the size of your browser. So for example, if I go like smaller, it'll probably bring up a little menu that you can click to actually toggle. So this thing here, so that's also defined in this component. And then we have a list, which corresponds to the list of components that we have in here. So I'm going to just copy one of these. And we're going to paste that in there. And we do have to change a couple of details in here. So first, we want it to send us to do. So we'll change the href there. And then we want to change the actual name here. We'll say to do list. That's going to update this here. And then we'll probably change the icon as well. We'll do like... I think check is an option. Check, like that. Yeah, fantastic. So now we can just click on here and it'll route us to our component. And now we can start building that out as well. So we'll close that up too. Well, first thing we probably have to do is create a separate like CS class. So I can create a new folder because I want to do sort of code behind. Well, ideally we could migrate everything over, but we'll take a look. So we'll do models depending on time. Models, and here I'll do right click new file, and then here I'll do to do item.cs, and then just make sure that's proper namespace. This is Blazor app.models, and then in here we'll define our public class to do item, and we'll try to keep it straightforward. We'll say public string title. And we'll have our getters and setters, and then we'll do public bool is done for if the task has been completed or not. Getters and setters. Now we have to go to our imports, and then we'll just add the models folder, so we don't have to import it into each component individually. So now if I go into that's done, we'll close this out, and then I say we'll have to use a code block now because we want to access C# members. So if I create a list, we'll say private list of type to do item. There we go. And we'll call them to-dos, and we'll just say it's a new list for now. Fantastic. So now we probably want a way of visualizing our to-dos, so we can use a list, which is UL. And then in here, we'll loop through each to-do that we actually have. So we'll do for each to-do and to-dos. There we go. We'll want to grab, we can probably do like we want to have them on the same line. We would probably, if we do like, And I guess we could do it on the same line, right? We could use like an input for the actual, like, is if it's complete, sort of like the check thing. We'll do a checkbox, and then here we're going to introduce something called binding. So binding is so it's two-way binding. Let me actually type it in first, and then we'll go from there. So to do dot is done. So we're going to bind the value of to do. So this to do, whichever to do that we're on, to the checkbox. So if it's done, it's going to be checked. So if it's done, true, checked. If it's not done, false. So it won't be checked, right? And then we'll add another input, and then we'll just call this we'll bind the value. Actually, we'll just add the title of the to do. Title. Actually, I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this. Probably want to just, yeah, maybe we'll add a input, and then we'll just add the value of the value of the title. Do dot title. Fantastic. Oh, I have to close this element here. Okay, so we also need a way of adding to-dos. So we'll go down. This will be outside of our list because this is what we're going to use to list the to-dos, but we'll need some sort of way to add to-dos into the actual list. So this list here. So we can do here something like input, and we'll say like placeholder, and we'll say add to-do title here, and for that we'll close that there. We'll need this one also, and then we need sort of a button. And then it's going to tell us, well, when we click on the button, we want it to do something. So we'll use the on click. Remember, we saw the on click on the counter. So every time it clicks, it would call increment. So here we're going to say add to do. So you're going to call the add to do method when you are clicked on. And I think that should be, actually, I think for this, we'll have to do like this here. There we go. Yes. And then we'll put some text there, add to do, or we could just do a plus sign or something like that. So this is giving me an error because this doesn't exist yet. So if we go to private void add to do, and then we'll just sort of create this method here. So it doesn't do anything at the moment, but we'll sort of add the thing here. So if we sort of recap of what's been going on, is we added the HTML here for the list of to-dos, and then we had a little sort of text area or not text, a text field where we can type in the title, and then once we click add to do, it's going to fire off this event. Where is it here? Add to do, and then now we have to actually create something for it to do, right? So now what we're going to say is, well, we need this this input here. Whoops, this input here to sort of that's where we're inputting the value of the title. So we need to be able to grab that and put it back into the actual list. So if I say private string, we'll say like new to do, something like that. And then we bind this here to the bind, and we bind to that new. There we go, new to do. Binding that value to the string. So again, binding means that whatever data is being put into here, you're going to give that over to the C# code. So the C# code knows what to do. And then when we actually click the button, it will do some like pretty standard validation, I guess, just to make sure it's not empty. We can do like string is null or empty white space. Well, is not, because we have this exclamation here. And we'll provide the new to do here, and if this is correct, then what we can do is go ahead and create a new to do and add it to that list. To do is that add, and we'll go ahead and create a new to do because we only have the title now. So we'll do to do item, and then in here we'll provide the title, and then we could probably give a default value of false to it's done, because if you're adding something to a new to-do list, we're sort of assuming that it's not done yet. So we can say title here is new to do, and then the is done is going to equal false. Yes, there we go. And now we can also, since we're inside of this if clause, we probably also want to reset the value of the new to do string, so we can hit string dot empty. That way it doesn't like keep that same value that you provided when you add the name in there. All right, you know what? Let's move this here. That way we can have a little bit more space. Or sort of there we go, there, and then put this one on this side. Okay. So now everything should have loaded for us already. If I go in here, let's refresh it just in case, just to make sure everything's still there. If I go into here, we'll see, let's try adding something, unless I mess up the code, but we'll do hang out with Gwyn. And then we see there, hang out with Gwyn is up here with that little check mark, but we haven't checked it off there. If we do check out Blazor sessions to do, and we have that there now. I guess sort of some way to show how many items we actually have instead of like maybe just like a number. We could add something like something in the title or something, maybe like a count up here. So we can do something like, we'll probably add it here. We'll say I guess we could do a count. That would make probably the most sense. We could do at a to-dos dot count. Let me see if my count, and then we'll probably do to-do and just make sure we're grabbing the ones that are not, whoops, something. We're grabbing the ones that are not set to completed, right? Yeah, so it's not to-do dot is done. Yeah, I think that's it, right? That would count the ones. I'm pretty sure, yeah. A little rusty in my C# skills, but here we are. We'll do Blazor attend Blazor session. So there's 0 in there. Okay, there we go, worked. And then if I click this off, it'll sort of correspond there too. When we say, I don't know, catch more reactor sessions, add that there too. And the cool thing is, all right, so we have our component. If we go into our index here on the left side, and then we add our counter here, space there, we can go into home here, and then we'll see that the count, oh, not the counter, to do, there we go. See our to-do list also gets rendered over here. And we're probably going to remove some of these because it looks kind of weird. We'll remove that, and we'll have it there. We could also pass in, like, what if we wanted to pass in like a name or something? So what we'd have to do is sort of set a public string name of owner. Yeah, I think that would work. And then we'll set it to a parameter. So parameter means this is something that we'd expect whoever is calling this component to provide to us. And public, oh, this has to be a property actually, get set. And we'll go into our here, and then we'll provide name of owner, and then we can say, you know, Gwyn or something like that. That, and then in the actual Razer file here inside of our, oops, we got an error somewhere. Oh, I have a there. We could reference a name of owner, and then the actual component would be Gwyn to do app, right? So, you know, it's not correct. It's probably like something like that. Gwyn's. Well, yeah, you get the picture, right? And yeah, that would change whatever we wanted to, GPS or and such. And the actual component works as expected. If we say, I don't know, add things to do, it'll still work. Like no matter where you call it from, it's going to work the same exact way. I guess we could try. We got a few minutes left. I'll try to keep 5 minutes for Q&A, but I wanted to show you how we could sort of refactor, because we have all this code in here, and there's also this concept of code behind. So let me just grab literally everything that is in here and cut it from here, and then we're going to create a new page in here. We'll do new file, and we're going to call this to-do.razer.cs. And then this is going to be sort of our class that we can do public class to do, say, to do base. And then this is going to inherit from component base. And this will allow us to put the code for this. And I'm just going to paste this in here. And we'll move this over here. And then the way I kind of approach this is I'll just start to address errors individually. This will introduce that there. And then probably using Blazor.app models. And I think that's pretty straightforward. If we go to do Razer, we no longer have this code attribute, and it's giving us a bunch of errors because it can't find anything. But we can do inherit, do base. We're telling us, okay, your base class, actually your all logic lives is inside of here. And then we got a couple more errors. Oh, protection level. So I think it needs to be at least protected or above in order for you to sort of work with it. I think that's good. Oh, one more here. Protected. I think we're good. Yeah, we're good. Let's move this over here and then go into to-do list, and actually we'll refresh the home. Just make sure it's working. Check in at reactor. Whoops, I lost something. What happened? To-do.Razer. Who has an error? Unless we need to rebuild it. We're good here. We're good here. We're good here. No problems. Maybe we need to. Oh, I know what happened. Okay. I think it stopped running. Unless there's an error, so it's not telling me where though. Well, anyway, it was working to an extent there. Maybe it's our index page to do. Huh. Inherits to do base. Yeah, that's odd. It's not telling me where the error is. All right, well, we got it working to some extent. This was, I guess, icing on the cake. But yeah, when you want to utilize sort of code behind, which is this concept of having a .cs file behind your components, you'll follow the convention of component name .razer.cs, and then you'll put all your logic on here. Oh, I think public string name owner . No, I can't really figure out what the error is. All right, anyway. I want to sort of switch to answering questions because I know we have maybe like 5 minutes left. All right, and then can we switch to full screen camera? Cool. Now that the bug is going to really bother me. But let me take a look at these questions that we got. I'm going to sort of switch this over here. That way I'm not looking this complete other way. We had a question about CSV read. I think I tackled that. Again, the slides have like a lot of resources for you to take a look at, so I'd highly recommend you grab a copy of those. Can you repeat the command for? Yeah, I think we did that. It's .NET New, Blazor WASM, which stands for Webassembly, and then -N, and you provide the name there of the actual, whatever you want to name the project. In this case, we called it Blazor app. What would you use to cache data locally with Blazor WebAssembly? What do you mean caching data locally? Like, well, I guess it depends on what you're trying to do. Do consider that it's a static application, right? Caching data locally. Yeah, I guess, like, what are you? I guess a little bit more context to that question would be super helpful. But besides that, I think I tackled every single question that's in here. We provided a lot of links, which is great. Yeah.
We are getting a couple of questions in on Learn TV that I'll just read off to you.
Yeah, perfect.
So we got one question in regards to the error. How would you debug that error?
That's a good question. I think this is something. I think this is something related to like because I don't really see it giving me errors at all. If you give me like 3 seconds, I'm just gonna like close VS Code and do it again and see if that is fixes it. So Blazor WebAssembly does have like debugging tools that you can. I think it works now in Edge. So Chromium-based browsers, you can set up like a remote debugging session there. I didn't go too deep into that because it's a little time consuming to set up, but you do have the option to do that. With Blazor Server, you have the complete debugging tools that you would have with any .NET application. To answer your question, and there's a link to debugging in the slide, so feel free to explore that as well.
And then we just got one more that asked, can you consider WebAssembly as a future of web development?
WebAssembly, yes. Personally, yes. I think it's because of like how compact it's like its goal is to be, or that it actually already is. Getting that near native speed is pretty nice. So I would definitely say yeah. I don't know how close we are to that, and that also doesn't mean that JavaScript is going anywhere, or if you're a current JavaScript dev, like you gotta go upskill or learn something different now. JavaScript very much still kind of like dominates the web, but it's cool to see that things like WebAssembly will enable not necessarily just .NET but other languages to utilize themselves to build web applications.
Cool. And I guess we'll just do one more.
Okay.
If we need real-time data or data from DB, would you need Blazor server?
Real-time data from?
They wrote DB.
Real-time database data? I'm guessing that's database DB. Mm-hmm. You can utilize something like SignalR to update like in real time. Like I built stuff with like Cosmos DB, so it's a NoSQL type database. And then whenever there's changes, it registers with the SignalR service, and then that pulls right into the WebAssembly client. So your answer is no. You'll just have to like figure out like which database you're using and that kind of stuff. Any new Blazor features coming with .NET 6 that you are excited about? I'm not necessarily features specific. I'm just very hyped around what .NET 6 means for the adoption of Blazor, and maybe not necessarily adoption, but people being more interested in it. I think it's cool that like for people like me who I'm not against JavaScript, but it's just like I like leveraging my existing skills. So I've become like a beginner web dev because I could utilize things like Blazor. So yeah, I guess like the more mature .NET becomes and the more open, like cross-platform open source and things like that, it enables like these cool tools to become a thing, right? Awesome. I think we got them all.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pop back on and share my slide for just a second because we've got a couple more minutes, and just do some shout outs for your upcoming series. So if we can just pull the slide up, I guess. Let me just get that. Exactly. There we go. So Gwyn will be joining us again next month for a series of sessions covering topics applicable to the 30 Days to Learn It Azure Developer Challenge. And I dropped that link for her series page into the chat just a little bit ago. It will be 4 sessions every Wednesday starting on September 8th. This is the first one from polling to push based. She mentioned it earlier about the SignalR, so definitely if you're interested in that, check it out as well. These sessions are all also going to eventually be on our on-demand YouTube channel, so if you are unavailable but you do want to check it, there is always the opportunity to do so later. So definitely check out that series link because it has all of the different dates and things, and you can get registered for that and get the streaming links ahead of time. I also dropped a survey link into the chat. If you have the opportunity, we would love it if you would fill out that survey, give us your feedback. You just have to enter when you click on that link 14215, just because that's tied to this event. Yeah, and then just a quick, actually, we're running out of time, so I will
Can I just quickly say that
yeah.
I figured it out. I forgot to add namespace. If you're a .NET developer, you know that you have to add the namespace to the .cs file. Silly mistake, but now it's working fine. It's on my screen. It's working. The code in GitHub works great, so go check that out. But yes, I figured that out. And definitely check out the series that we have going on in September. Lots more Azure stuff coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gwyn. This was fantastic.
Thank you all, and thanks to the chat for hanging out. Can't wait to see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay.